Imagine waking up one morning and suddenly learning that every car, bottle of wine, and luxury handbag arriving from Europe could soon be slapped with a 50% tariff. Overnight, prices in showrooms, supermarkets, and even online stores could skyrocket. Essential goods and dream purchases, all suddenly out of reach for millions of Americans. But then, just as quickly as the threat arose, it's put on ice. Welcome to the unpredictable world of global economics in 2025, where a phone call between Donald Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen just might decide the fate of trillions in transatlantic trade. Today we'll dig deep into Trump's latest tariff bombshell, the 50% levy threat on European Union goods, and the jaw-dropping back and forth that left everyone from car makers to Wall Street scrambling. Is this just old-school brinkmanship, or the start of a global economic storm? And why did Trump suddenly pull back, only to leave us all hanging until July 2025? Stay with us, because the stakes are higher than ever, and the drama is just heating up. To truly understand the chaos unleashed by a single social media post, we need to rewind. The United States and Europe have been economic partners and rivals for decades. Since World War II, the transatlantic bond has woven together factories, finance, and families on both sides of the ocean, creating the world's largest trading bloc. Every minute, $4 million worth of goods flow between U.S. and EU ports, from Alabama-made SUVs landing in Hamburg, to French cheese in Chicago delis, to software licenses and pharmaceuticals crisscrossing the Atlantic. But beneath this shared prosperity, tensions simmer. Trade, of course, is rarely a win-win for everyone. American workers, especially in manufacturing and agriculture, have watched anxiously as factories shuttered and jobs moved overseas. The U.S. goods trade deficit with the EU soared to $235 billion in 2024, fueling political frustration. Donald Trump, both during his first term and now on the campaign trail, made one thing clear. He thinks America's been getting a raw deal. Trump's strategy boils down to pressure. By threatening giant tariffs, he hopes to force Europe to open its markets further, curb what he calls unfair subsidies, and reshore jobs to U.S. soil. His supporters argue it's tough love, finally putting American interests first. But critics see chaos, and they have a point. The timeline reads almost like political whiplash. On a Friday evening, the White House warns that, unless Europe caves to U.S. demands, a whopping 50% tariff will slam EU goods in just days. Automakers from BMW to Fiat brace for carnage. Luxury fashion houses in Paris and Milan panic over plummeting U.S. orders. Then, by Sunday, it all seems to vanish. Why? Trump posts online about getting a call from Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, formally asking for a delay. Tariffs are postponed until July 9, 2025. What happened behind the scenes? Chris Murphy, a Democratic senator, ridiculed the back and forth, writing, "The tariffs are on and it's a different percent per country because of a formula I made up. Wait, but now they're off for everyone but China. Oh, but now back on. And we are writing letters to tell them the percent. Oh no, now it's 50% on Europe. Wait, now no tariffs on Europe BTW. What a joke." Economist Justin Wolfers quipped, "Friday's EU tariff announcement lasted nearly the whole weekend, or 18% of a Scaramucci." Even some Republicans sighed. This wasn't exactly the image of predictability international markets craved. But unpredictability is a weapon in Trump's playbook. The idea, keep adversaries off balance, extract last-minute concessions, and show American voters an uncompromising leader. Still, the fallout is tangible. Just the threat of tariffs caused German exports to the U.S. to fall 5% in the first quarter of 2025. U.S. automakers, Ford, GM, Tesla, watched nervously as BMW announced a $1 billion investment in its South Carolina plant. The message? Adapt rapidly or risk catastrophe. Let's put numbers on the table. The average tariff on EU goods in 2024 was just 3.1%. Raising that to 50% would be seismic. The Peterson Institute for International Economics, PIIE, estimates a U.S.-EU trade war could shrink U.S. GDP by 1%. European central bank experts warn that trade uncertainty could depress investment across Europe by nearly 0.8% this year alone. France's glittering luxury sector, already wobbling, could lose 20% of U.S. sales. Meanwhile, the U.S. International Trade Commission calculates that new car prices could spike by $20,500, putting the dream of a new vehicle further out of reach for American families. Scott Lincecum of the Cato Institute is blunt. Tariffs are taxes that ultimately burden American consumers. And Chad Bown at PIIE adds, a trade war between the US and EU would be a lose-lose situation. But numbers are only half the story. Behind them, millions of jobs and livelihoods hang in the balance. American soybean farmers, already hammered by previous trade spats, could see incomes drop 15% if Europe retaliates. In the steel towns of the Midwest and the vineyards of Bordeaux, uncertainty is more than an economic metric. It's a daily reality. So why did Trump blink? Why did the White House back off, at least for now? The answer lies in the escalating game of brinkmanship. Europe, far from rolling over, retaliated with diplomatic and legal countermeasures. The EU initiated proceedings at the World Trade Organization, WTO, accusing the US of violating trade rules. In private, EU leaders warned of pinpoint tariffs on politically sensitive US exports. Think bourbon from Kentucky and Harley-Davidson motorcycles from Wisconsin. The message was clear. We will respond decisively to any unjustified tariffs, declared Bernd Lang, chair of the European Parliament's International Trade Committee. Meanwhile, European strategists whispered about looking to Asia, deepening trade ties with China, South Korea, and Japan to offset the loss of American buyers and investors. The EU needs to stand firm and pursue alternative trade partners, said Hosukli Makiyama of the European Center for International Political Economy. Jacob Kierkegaard at the German Marshall Fund echoed, the EU should explore deeper trade ties with Asian countries. Suddenly, the unthinkable seemed possible. Could Trump's tactics fracture a relationship that has anchored Western prosperity for generations? On Main Street, anxiety spread. U.S. retailers and importers rushed to front-load orders, fearing supply chain chaos. Logistics firms scrambled for warehouse space as everyone tried to beat the deadline. Financial markets gyrated, with investors yanking billions out of stocks tied to international trade. There's a growing sense that, like a high-stakes poker game, the next move could trigger either a massive deal or a global trade meltdown. And it's not just about dollars and cents. Underneath, the world is watching to see if the liberal trading order, the foundation of post-war economic stability, can survive in the face of populist pressures and political brinksmanship. Gary Huffbauer at PIIE sums it up. Trade wars rarely achieve their intended objectives. The future hinges on a few explosive questions. Will the US and EU negotiate a grand bargain, shelving tariffs in favor of freer, fairer trade? Or is the stage set for an escalating spiral of retaliation, hurting businesses, workers, and consumers on both sides? And who really holds the stronger hand? America, with its vast consumer market and military muscle, or Europe, with its export-driven economies and growing ties to Asia? As July 2025 looms, tension is mounting. The White House's next tweet could move markets. European leaders, meanwhile, face rising political pressure at home not to capitulate. But here's the twist. As both sides dig in, some insiders warn that the real danger isn't just a trade spat, but the risk of unraveling decades of global cooperation. In the end, could this tariff skirmish be the spark that triggers a much larger shift, from globalization to fragmentation, from shared prosperity to a new era of economic confrontation? With so much hanging in the balance, one thing is certain. The next round of negotiations will be anything but routine. So, who stands to win and who stands to lose as the world waits for July 2025? And crucially, what surprises might still upend the game before the deadline arrives? So, with the stage set and the world holding its breath for July 2025, let's peer into the future. What could happen next in this transatlantic drama? Will it be negotiation or confrontation? And crucially, who will blink first? The stakes are dizzyingly high, and the ripple effects could shape everything from the price of your next car to the fate of entire industries on both sides of the Atlantic. First, let's talk scenarios. Right now, diplomats and trade experts are working overtime to map out every possible outcome. There are four main paths this standoff could take. The first and best-case scenario, a negotiated resolution. In this case, US and EU negotiators hammer out a comprehensive trade agreement before the July deadline. This would mean both sides make compromises. Perhaps the EU agrees to lower certain barriers, while the US backs off the most extreme tariffs. Such a deal could bring stability to global markets and send a reassuring signal to businesses battered by months of uncertainty. As economist Chad Bown warned, a trade war between the US and EU would be a lose-lose situation. The hope is that pragmatism prevails, jobs are protected, and new opportunities emerge. But what if things go south? Scenario 2 is the nightmare. an escalating trade war. If negotiations break down, both sides could start slapping tariffs on a wide range of goods. The U.S. could impose its threatened 50% tariff on EU cars and luxury goods. The EU would strike back, likely targeting U.S. agriculture, tech, and iconic brands. Industry estimates suggest U.S. consumers could pay up to $2,500 more per vehicle, and France's luxury sector could see a 20% plunge in export sales. The respected Peterson Institute for International Economics projects the U.S. economy could shrink by as much as 1% if a full-blown trade war erupts. Not to mention, U.S. farm incomes could crater by up to 15% as EU buyers turn elsewhere. And that's just the beginning. Global supply chains would be thrown into chaos. Companies might delay investments, lay off workers, or even move operations overseas. The European Central Bank has already warned that uncertainty alone could slash Eurozone investment by nearly 1%. BMW's billion-dollar bet on its South Carolina plant could suddenly look risky. German exports, already down 5% this year, could tumble further, weakening Europe's industrial core. The third scenario is a partial accommodation, a kind of uneasy truce. Maybe tariffs go up in some sectors but not others. Both sides manage to save face, but tensions linger. The markets might breathe a short sigh of relief, but the underlying issues would remain unresolved. Businesses would still need to hedge their bets, never certain whether today's truce might become tomorrow's trade war. As Bernd Lang of the European Parliament put it, we will respond decisively to any unjustified tariffs. The message, even a half measure could trigger future fights. Then there's Scenario 4, alternative dispute resolution. Here, the U.S. and EU turn to international organizations like the WTO to settle their grievances. The EU has already taken this step, launching official complaints. But with the World Trade Organization weakened by years of political infighting and blocked appointments, outcomes could be slow, murky, and unsatisfying. Meanwhile, tariffs could stick around for months or years as cases drag on. Now let's dig deeper. What makes this showdown so volatile? It's not just about cars or wine or cheese. At its core, this is a struggle over who sets the rules of global trade in the 21st century. For decades, the US and EU have been the main architects of the world's trading system. If they turn inward and start fighting each other, the whole order could unravel. Other countries, especially China, would be quick to fill the vacuum. Hosuke Lee Makiyama, a leading trade expert, notes, the EU needs to stand firm and pursue alternative trade partners. That means if the US closes its doors, Europe may deepen ties with Asia, South America, and Africa. That could permanently change the direction of world trade flows, with huge implications for jobs and economic growth everywhere. For American consumers, the risks are immediate and personal. Think higher prices not just on BMWs or Ferraris, but everyday items like appliances, electronics, and food products. As Scott Lincecum of the Cato Institute put it, tariffs are taxes that ultimately burden American consumers. For European companies, the U.S. market is a lifeline. Many German, French, and Italian firms sell more to America than to any other country outside the EU. If those doors slam shut, layoffs and lost income are almost guaranteed. But here's the twist. There are also opportunities amid the uncertainty. Trade crises, while painful, can spark innovation. Companies may accelerate efforts to diversify suppliers. Some U.S. firms could benefit from less competition from European imports, at least in the short run. And in the long term, new trade routes and partnerships may emerge, with Asia potentially playing an even bigger role. That brings us to a crucial point. What does all this mean for you, sitting comfortably at home, watching the headlines roll by? First, pay close attention to how this standoff evolves. The decisions made in Washington and Brussels over the next few months could affect everything from the value of your investments to the price tags at your local dealership or supermarket. If you're an entrepreneur or small business owner, now's the time to review your supply chains. Ask, are you too dependent on one market or one supplier? It might be wise to explore alternatives, just as multinational giants are doing. Having a plan B could mean the difference between surviving and thriving if trade tensions escalate. For consumers, brace for possible price hikes, especially on imported goods. If you're thinking of making a major purchase, perhaps a European car, luxury item, or even certain agricultural products, keep an eye on tariff news. Buying sooner rather than later might save you thousands if new taxes hit in 2025. Investors should also take note. Market volatility tends to spike during periods of trade uncertainty. Sectors like autos, agriculture, and luxury goods could be especially vulnerable. On the flip side, US-based manufacturers serving domestic consumers may benefit if imports become more expensive. Even for those far removed from the stock market or global trade, these events hold lessons. They're a stark reminder that policies made by governments thousands of miles away can have profound effects on daily life, on jobs, prices, and the economic health of entire regions. And here's one more secret to navigating times like these. Always look beyond the headlines. Politicians might talk tough, but the real outcomes are shaped by what happens behind closed doors, by negotiators, industry lobbyists, and yes, even everyday consumers who vote with their wallets. So, as we approach July 2025, the world is watching. Will negotiation or confrontation win out? Will pragmatism guide policy, or will pride and politics drive both sides over the brink? If history is any guide, intense brinkmanship and clown show theatrics, like those lampooned on social media, often give way to face-saving deals at the 11th hour. The US and EU, economic giants with $1.3 trillion in annual trade, have clashed before, and usually found a way back to the table. The risks of an all-out trade war are simply too great for either side to ignore. But don't be lulled into complacency. Experts like Gary Huffbauer warn, trade wars rarely achieve their intended objectives. Even temporary standoffs can inflict lasting scars, erode trust, and drive countries to seek new partners. It's entirely possible that this latest crisis will not just test, but permanently reshape the world's most important economic relationship. So, who will blink first? If history and expert opinion offer any clues, both sides will almost certainly step back from the edge, but not before weeks or months of tough negotiation, headline-grabbing threats, and yes, more social media fireworks. A deal is likely, but not guaranteed. Both the US and EU have powerful domestic interests and political egos at play, meaning real compromise will be hard-won and probably incomplete. For now, all eyes turn to the quiet but feverish machinery of diplomacy. That's where this story will be written. And here's a final secret fact. While tariffs and trade wars dominate the headlines, the real winner is often not the country that talks the loudest, but the one that plans ahead, quietly diversifying, investing in innovation, and building new partnerships. That's a lesson for governments and for all of us. Thanks for sticking with us through this deep dive into the high-stakes world of US-EU trade. If you learned something new, or if you have thoughts on how this showdown will end, hit the like button, share your predictions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for